Welcome back, students, and let us be together and continue from where we stopped. Right, last time we were discussing something about the quadratic expressions, and we discussed issues about how we can factorize the quadratic expression as such. But today we would like to take us further into the equations, which are defined as quadratic equations. We'll be discussing on how we can solve quadratic equations. But before that, let us get to know what kind of quadratic equations I'm talking about. All quadratic equations are in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. It is more like the same quadratic expression, but now when we introduce an equal sign, the entire expression now comes in like an equation. But in this format, the expression ax squared plus bx from our previous discussion is defined as a quadratic expression. Right, so we already talked much about this. And this term here, which has got the variable x raised to the power 2, we said this one is a quadratic term. And all other terms were already discussed as say talk of this term, which have got the letter b is a constant, c is a constant, and a is a constant. So let's not waste much on that, discussing about the word, let's say, quadratic expression aside. But let's take that, say, quadratic equations are always equations which are in this form. The equations which has got a quadratic expressions with it. Now, here, firstly, we need at least first of all to know some basic mechanisms that you can use to solve quadratic equation. Much like to know the format of the quadratic equation, which is in the form of x squared plus bx plus c. There are three methods that can be used to solve quadratic equations. One is by use of factor method. Secondly is by use of the completing of a square. We can use the method of completing of the square to solve quadratic equations. Lastly is by the use of the formula, which we call it the quadratic formula. But today we work on the factor method. So let's be together and try to see how we use the factor method in solving the quadratic equations. Right, so here we are solving by factor method. Right. So here I'll give an example of a quadratic equation, and then we're going to discuss the steps that we can use to solve such quadratic equations by factor method. But this is a good example of a quadratic equation. Just by the format which I gave you earlier, you can see here we've got 3x squared minus 7x minus 6 is equal to 0 is the same as previously we talked of the ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Which tells us always the quadratic equations are always equated to 0 as such. So this is a good example of it. So now, let's discuss how we can solve this equation by the first method, which is known as the factor method. Usually when we talk of solving the equation, we are there at just trying to find the factors. So that's the value of x in this case. If the equation has got the variable x, we are going to find the value of x. If the equation sometimes can have the variable y, it means in that case you are going to work out with the value of y. But in this case, we have got an equation which has got a variable x, so we are going to work out with the value of what? Of x. So here are some of the steps that they are going to take in order to come up with the value of x in this equation. Right. To be guided in a normal way, here with me are the basic steps which I'm going to explain to you, and you need at least to stay here and be able to follow them. Right, so here I'll transfer this one up here. We'll look at the space. We have got 3x squared minus 7x minus 6 is equal to 0. Right. The first thing that you always need to do each time you need to solve the quadratic equation is firstly, you have to make sure that the equation should take that format. The format is always expressed to 0. So always make sure that the equation is equated to 0. Like that is the first step. Like in this case, the equation is already equal to 0. So for example, maybe the equation was something like this term, constant term, was maybe somewhere here, like this. Still more is quadratic equation. You still more need to make sure that this constant term has to be transferred to that side in order to meet that form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. But this example is already right. So step 1 is already highlighted. So here we'll just leave it as it is. So this is minus 6 is equal to 0. But rather in this case, we're going to focus much on step number 2. Right. Now, in the step number 2, we are instructed to concentrate on the quadratic expression part of that equation, which in this case is 3x squared minus 7x minus 6. And now, what are we going to do with this quadratic expression part of the equation? We are instructed to factorize the quadratic expression. So that is step number 2. So what I'll do here, I'll come here and concentrate on the 3x squared minus 7x minus 6 is equal to 0. We are going to follow the same previous step we discussed that time. Right, so if you remember, that time we talked of the first thing in factorizing, we always have to multiply the quadratic term by the constant term, like this. So like here, when I multiply this by this, the answer I get there is negative, that is what, 18x squared. So if we're still to follow the same steps of factorization, you'll be able to remember and follow me that once you find the product of the two terms here, you're then now going to find the factors of which. So here we are going to find the factors of negative 18x squared. And these factors we mentioned, that should be those two factors, such that when you add, that will give you the sum of the middle term, which is negative 7x. So the factors of this that can give you negative 7x are minus 9x and what? That's 2x, like that. Then we substitute this one for the negative 7x itself, and like that one all over, come up to 3x squared minus 7x. Now instead of 7x, we are going to substitute with a 9x, then plus 2x, and finalize with the negative 6 like this. And continue indicating the x sign and into 0, because this time we are solving an equation. Now, once we have done this, we follow the same steps. We are going to group this one into 2. This expression, that is 3x squared minus 9x, one group, 2x and minus 6, another group. And then we're going to divide it by a common factor in each one of those groups. So like here, for this and this, we have a common factor which is 3x, like that. We divide here, we get x. This get there, we get negative 3, like that. And now when we're finding a factor right here and there, as I said, as I mentioned, we need to make sure that the factor should be the one that when you factor that expression, then that should be the same as the previous one, which in this case is x minus 3. Right, so the factor right here and there, obviously there it is positive 2. And this 2 gets to 2x x, and the 2 get into minus 6 as negative 3. So you can see here what I get is the same as the previous one. Then from what I mentioned, after we've done this, then we are there going now to identify some another common factor in this resultant expression. So what is here is just like how about this expression and that expression being added. So you check here and there, you find that each one of these expressions have a common factor which is x minus 3. So I'll take the x minus 3 and write it here, divide on each of those two expressions. So when I divide this one here, it means that like say this will cancel this and we are made with 3x. And again then x minus 3 will also cancel with x minus 3 and the result remaining is a positive 2. And this is into 0. Right, so you can see the whole process of factorization is still working here. And it is it's just like a must that we need to use when you're solving our quadratic equation as such. Now from this stage, we have got two brackets, or more like two binomials, which are expressions. In this case, what do we do next then? Because it's just like we're finalizing issues about factorization. Now, we go then now to step number 3. What are the instructions to step number 3? They say equate each expression to 0. To mean what? Look, what you have here, there are two expressions after factorization. So here it means these expressions are the ones which are referred to here in instruction number 3. So each one of them, when we write x minus 3 multiplied by 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. This is as good as writing x minus 3 is equal to 0. And then, or 3x plus 2 is also equal to 0. Right. So when we reach at this juncture, this is just like a historical part of the simple equations that you have been solving in the past, which are linear, where it just need you some kind of just arranging items together. More importantly, in this case, we are going to have what? Two equations as such, which are linear, not quadratic in this case. As you can see, we don't have a quadratic term here, and we don't have a quadratic term in that. So now, what do we do then with these two equations that were formed? Right. So we have here on the last step, which takes us to say, just arrange items together for each one of those equations. So here it means, if I can look at the equation, the first equation here, I can see that negative 3 and 0 are like terms. So it means negative 3 has to be transferred to the right hand side to have x is equal to 0 plus a 3. Because this term, this sign will always tell me to go there. So if a 0 is just as good as forming a 0, because when we sum up with the 0, it's as good as just writing this number in 3. 3 plus 0, the answer is just a 3. Right. Or, now we go for the other equation, which is 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. So it means obviously the 2 will also go to the right hand side, where it will be with a 0. So here we have 3x is equal to 0. Now a 2 will turn out to be negative 2, like that. So now what we have there, on the right hand side, we have that say a negative 2. Right. But here we cannot end there, because what we are trying to focus upon is the value of x. But here x has got a coefficient which is the 3. So we need that to get rid of this 3. And now, as you can see, the only way how we can get rid of that 3 in order to have x alone is simply by just dividing both sides by that coefficient which is the 3. So here we go like 3 x divided by 3. We do that again on the other side in order to balance up the equation. Because we cannot just divide the 3 on one side. The rules of equations are violated in that case. But there, we divide on both sides. So what we have here, 3 here, cancel for another 3, and we have got x is equal to negative 2 over a 3. Right. So, which means, in this case, our values of x in these equations are, we conclude here to say that x is equal to 3, or that is negative 2 over 3 as such. Right. So, students, this is the way we solve quadratic equations. So I'll just go through here within a minute, going through the steps. We talk of the very first step, how to make sure your equation is equal to 0. If it is not equal to 0, please do it. A term which is on one side, just transfer to the other one. And here, the second step, remember to factorize the expression part, which is the quadratic equation. by the method which we discussed previously. So the ones that we have done here, from this stage here, going up to this level, you see that we are following the same procedures. So it means this and these are the factors. Once you are done the factorization, you now have to concentrate on the two factors which I've just obtained after factorizing the expression part, this and that. The ones we just have to equate to 0 are each one of them. So once you have equated to 0, you just have a simple linear equation which you just have to wake up on, and then finally you find the power of x as in this case is the 3, and here it is the -2/3. Right. So finally, before I leave, can I just give you this exercise for you to actually attempt it? Still, one you don't have to love this one because we're still in the discussion. Mathematics, right? So have this as an exercise of trial, right? So here I'll ask you to solve the equation by what we call the factor method. Right. The expression of which is this. That's on top of now that's negative 5x is equal to negative 2 minus 3x squared. Right. So students, today we are going to stop here. In the next discussion, we are there going to introduce ourselves into the second method of solving quadratic equations by completing of the square. But then we'll first of all do something about the perfect squares, we'll discuss them out, what are they, then take our step into that. Right, for today, let's stop here. Thank you.